Millionaire loses his memory and marries a maid. When he remembers, he's shocked Aiden Marshall never imagined that a single moment of weakness could forever change the trajectory of his life. He had been standing on the edge of the world, wealth, status, and privilege all at his fingertips. But one wrong move was all it took. A mysterious cyber attack erased his memory, leaving him vulnerable and in a life he never knew. When he woke up in a small, dimly lit hospital room, his mind was blank. The only face he could recognize was Ava's, a woman who seemed strangely familiar, though he could not place her. She was caring, always by his side, guiding him through each moment with a gentle patience that filled him with a sense of trust he couldn't explain. But there was something deeper about Ava. Her kindness wasn't just her personality. There was a history between them that Aiden couldn't remember, but instinctively felt. Yet, as time passed, he began to notice things that didn't add up, unspoken tensions, fleeting looks of guilt when she thought he wasn't watching. As his mind slowly pieced together fragments of his forgotten past, Aiden found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't understand. Was she truly the angel everyone claimed her to be? Or was there more to the story? With every passing day, the truth of his past loomed closer. But Aiden wasn't ready for what he was about to uncover. Ava, the woman who had saved him, might hold the key to something darker than he ever imagined. Aiden Marshall had always been the golden child. Born into an influential family, his father, Richard Marshall, was a renowned business tycoon who demanded perfection in every aspect of his life. Aiden, however, had always felt the pressure. The burden of his father's expectations loomed large, especially in a world where his wealth and power were the only things that seemed to matter. But there was something inside of Aiden that craved more. He didn't want to be just another face in the family's legacy. He wanted to make his own mark. Yet, despite all his riches and success, Aiden felt an emptiness, a lack of connection to the world outside the boardroom and his fiancée, Victoria Winters. She was the daughter of another influential family, poised, yet her cold, calculating demeanor never quite matched the warmth Aiden had imagined in a partner. But he had accepted their engagement as a formality, a preordained next step in his life. Ava, on the other hand, was a stark contrast. She had no interest in status, wealth, or what Aiden's world represented. Her life was humble. She worked as a maid in a small, run-down estate on the outskirts of the city, trying to make ends meet while caring for her sick mother. She was selfless, driven by a sense of duty and love, always putting others before herself. She never expected anything from life other than to do her best, to help where she could, and to hold on to the little joys that made her feel human. It was an unexpected freak accident that brought Aiden and Ava together. He had been driving through the rain late at night, tired and distracted, when the car went off the road and crashed. Ava had been there, working late, and had witnessed the accident. In the midst of chaos, she rushed to his side, pulled him from the wreckage, and kept him conscious long enough for help to arrive. Her compassion was unwavering, her voice the only thing that kept him tethered to the present. When Aiden woke up in the hospital, Ava was there. She didn't treat him like a stranger, yet there was something in the way she looked at him that made him feel like there was something he should remember, something that pulled him towards her. She wasn't a face from his life before the accident. She was someone new. And yet, there was a deep, unshakable feeling that connected them, one that Aiden couldn't ignore. The hospital staff and even his father praised Ava's bravery, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the room that Aiden couldn't place. His father's words to him were gentle, almost distant, as though his father's true feelings toward Ava were hidden behind a well-masked facade. Why had no one mentioned her before? Why did she seem to carry the weight of a past Aiden couldn't remember? As Ava continued to care for him, Aiden's thoughts grew increasingly conflicted. On the surface, she seemed like the answer to his prayers, her kindness, her warmth, her genuine heart that made him feel whole again. But there were too many unanswered questions. The more Iden spent time with Ava, the more he realized that something about his situation wasn't as clear as it seemed. And perhaps, in his growing bond with her, Iden was walking directly into the heart of a truth that could change everything he thought he knew about himself and the people closest to him. As days passed, Iden's condition improved, but his memories remained a fractured puzzle. He felt no attachment to his past, no familiarity with the luxurious mansion he was told was his home, nor with the woman who claimed to be his fiancée. Victoria continued to visit, her perfectly curated words offering no warmth, no hint of love. She spoke of their upcoming wedding plans, but Iden found no joy in the idea. Instead, he began to find himself drawn to Ava, the woman who had saved him. Ava was nothing like Victoria. There was no pretension in her, no ambition. She didn't want anything from him except to ensure that he was safe. She was gentle and genuine, a stark contrast to the world he had come from. But her presence stirred something inside of him, an unfamiliar sense of peace that he couldn't ignore. She made him feel human again. But there was also a growing sense of unease. The more time Iden spent with Ava, the more he felt like something was being kept from him. Why didn't anyone tell him about her? Why did she feel so familiar, yet so unknown? At first, Iden assumed his father's reluctance toward Ava was due to his desire for Iden to marry Victoria. Richard Marshall, the powerful patriarch, had made it clear that his vision for Iden's life was one of wealth and influence. His father's disapproval of Ava seemed like just another attempt to steer Iden back into the world of high society. But soon, Iden began to see cracks in the facade of his father's authority. One evening, as Iden sat in the study of his father's mansion, he overheard a conversation between his father and a trusted lawyer. "We need to keep him away from that girl. It's for his own good," Richard said, his voice low but sharp. The words sent a chill down Iden's spine. Who was that girl? Why was his father so determined to control his life even now, when Iden had no memory of anything? He confronted his father that evening, and the conversation that followed only deepened his suspicions. Richard was evasive, dodging Iden's questions, offering explanations that felt empty. The more Iden pressed, the more distant his father became. It was clear there was something Iden wasn't being told, something dangerous that involved Ava. Iden's confusion grew, but his growing affection for Ava only complicated things further. He began to visit her regularly, under the guise of his physical therapy. But the more he learned about her life, the more he realized there was something profoundly beautiful about her resilience. She had no wealth, no family legacy to uphold. She had only her heart, and that heart was pure and unyielding. One evening, after a long day of work, Iden found himself at Ava's small apartment. It was simple, cozy, and filled with love. He sat beside her on the worn sofa as they talked about life, about their dreams. She was nothing like the women in his past. There were no ulterior motives, no agendas, just a genuine connection. Ava, too, began to open up. Her mother's illness had drained her, leaving her with little to look forward to. Yet, she had never stopped believing in the goodness of people. Iden could see the pain in her eyes when she spoke of her past, the loss of her father, the struggle to keep her family afloat. She had been self-sacrificing for so long that it had become a part of her soul. But even as Iden began to recognize his growing feelings for Ava, doubts clouded his mind. Could someone like him, a man who had lived his entire life in wealth and privilege, really belong with someone like her? Would he ever be able to let go of his family's expectations? Would his father ever approve of a woman like Ava? Meanwhile, Victoria's visits became more frequent, and her behavior grew more possessive. She would arrive unannounced at Iden's side, her presence a reminder of the life he was supposed to lead. The passive-aggressive remarks she made about Ava, about how Iden was still recovering, felt calculated, as though she was trying to drive a wedge between them. At one point, Victoria even tried to make Aiden feel guilty for spending too much time with Ava, as though he were betraying her. "You're not thinking clearly, Aiden," she would say, her eyes narrowing with concern that felt more like manipulation. "Ava's not the kind of person you need. You belong in our world, our society." But Aiden was no longer sure of what their world meant. The more he saw of Victoria, the more he realized she wasn't the woman he wanted. Her obsession with appearances and her obsession with his wealth began to feel suffocating. It was as if she saw him only as a means to her own ambition, not as a person with his own needs and desires. With each passing day, Aiden grew more conflicted. He began to confront his emotions, his desires, and his fears. Was he falling for Ava because she was kind and selfless? Or was it because she was the only person who had shown him true, unfiltered love? He didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. The man he used to be was no longer the man he wanted to be. The tension between Aiden and his father reached its breaking point. One evening, Aiden decided he could no longer ignore the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. Determined to uncover the truth, he visited his father's office, knowing that this conversation might change everything. He found Richard sitting behind his massive desk, his expression unreadable. As usual, the room was filled with the scent of expensive leather, the walls adorned with the symbols of wealth and power. But today, Aiden felt an unfamiliar chill in the air. This was no longer the father he had once known. The man sitting before him was a stranger, someone with secrets buried deep beneath the polished surface. "Dad, I need answers," Aiden began, his voice firm but trembling. "Why have you been so determined to keep Ava and me apart? What's really going on?" Richard's eyes flickered, a hint of panic crossing his face before he quickly masked it. He leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him as if trying to maintain control. "You don't understand, Aiden," Richard said, his voice steady but strained. "I've done everything for you. Everything I've built, the wealth, the influence, was for your future, for our family's legacy. Ava isn't part of that future. She's a distraction." Aiden stood up, his anger rising. "A distraction? You've been hiding the truth from me, haven't you? There's more to this than just her. You've been controlling everything in my life, and I don't even know who I really am." His father's face darkened. He was no longer the distant figure of authority Aiden had once admired. The facade began to crack, revealing something more sinister. "I didn't want you to remember, Aiden," Richard admitted, his voice low. "I didn't want you to remember what you were really involved in." The words hit Aiden like a thunderclap. "What do you mean?" Richard took a deep breath before continuing, his eyes filled with regret. "Your accident wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. I had to erase your memories to protect you from the truth. You were becoming too involved with Ava, and that was something I could never allow." Aiden's mind raced as the truth began to sink in. The memories he had lost, the life he had once known, had all been part of a carefully orchestrated plan. His father hadn't just erased his memories to protect him, he had done it to control him. "You didn't just want to control my life," Aiden said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You wanted to control my very identity." Richard's face twisted with emotion, but it was not remorse. It was fear. "You were never meant to find out, Aiden. I did this for you, for your own good." But Aiden was no longer listening. The truth was too much to bear. Everything he had thought he knew about his life had been a lie. His family, his wealth, the future he had been promised. It was all part of a web of lies spun by the very people who should have cared for him most. In that moment, Aiden realized that the only way to truly be free was to sever ties with the life his father had built for him. He could no longer live under the thumb of someone who had manipulated him for so long. But the revelation came with a price. Richard wasn't about to let go of his control so easily. "You think you can just walk away from everything?" Richard sneered. You have no idea what you're up against. You're nothing without us." As Aiden stood there, facing the man who had shaped his life, he felt a surge of clarity. The person he had been before, the obedient son, the heir to the fortune, was gone. He didn't want that life anymore. He wanted something real, something that was his own. "I'm done, Dad," Aiden said, his voice steady. "I'm done with this life, with all of it. I'm going to find my own path, one that doesn't have anything to do with your control." With those final words, Aiden turned and walked out of the office, leaving his past behind. The days that followed Aiden's confrontation with his father were a blur. He had left the life he had known, but it wasn't without consequence. As the weight of his decision sank in, Aiden began to realize just how deep the roots of his father's control had gone. He felt like a stranger in his own life, surrounded by the remnants of a world he no longer wanted to be a part of. But amidst the chaos, there was Ava. She was his anchor, the one person who had always believed in him. Even though the truth had been buried for so long, Ava had never wavered in her support. She had known there was more to Aiden's amnesia than anyone had been willing to admit. Now, as he shared the truth of what he had learned, her face softened with understanding and compassion. "I'm so sorry, Aiden," Ava said one night as they sat together on the porch of her small but cozy apartment. "I never knew what you were going through. I should have fought harder to help you remember." Aiden took her hand, grateful for her presence. "You did help me. You always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." There was a quiet moment between them, the night air cool and soothing. The stars above seemed to shimmer with the possibility of a new beginning. Aiden had no idea what his future would look like, but for the first time in a long time, he felt free. "Where do we go from here?" Ava asked, her voice gentle, yet hopeful. Aiden looked out into the night, his heart filled with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "I don't know, but I know I can't go back to my father. I have to find my own way." Ava nodded, understanding. "And I'll be here. I'll help you no matter what." As Aiden embraced his new reality, the scars of the past began to fade. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, he felt like he was in control of his own destiny. The wealth, the expectations, the pressures, they no longer mattered. What mattered now was the life he was building with Ava, the life that was all his own. The road ahead was not without its challenges. Aiden had to rebuild himself from the ground up, forging his own identity and figuring out how to navigate a world without the protection of his father's influence. But with Ava by his side, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. They spent the following months together, learning about each other in new ways. Ava, who had always been the nurturing, supportive figure, revealed her own fears and doubts. She had never truly felt like she belonged in the world Aiden's family had created, and now, together, they were forging a new path, one that was uncertain but filled with potential. Eventually, Aiden found a new purpose. He used his knowledge and skills to help others, becoming involved in causes that truly mattered to him. He didn't need his father's wealth or legacy. He had discovered something far more valuable, the power of his own choices. And Ava? She flourished too. No longer defined by the expectations of the rich and powerful, she found her voice and a career that gave her true fulfillment. Together, they had become a force, not bound by the past, but determined to create a future built on their own terms. As the months turned into years, Aiden and Ava's love grew stronger, a bond forged through struggle and perseverance. They had faced the darkest corners of their lives and emerged stronger for it. And though the past would always be a part of them, they no longer let it define who they were or where they were going. Aiden had learned that the real power was not in the wealth or the titles he had once sought, but in the ability to choose his own path. And in the end, it was that very choice that led him to the one thing he had always wanted, but never truly known: freedom.